Order, and welcome to today's session of the Transport Select Committee. We'll be looking at the work of the Civil Aviation Authority. Before we begin, I could invite each of you just for our records to state your name and position, please. I'll start with Sir Stephen.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. I'm Sir Stephen Hillier. I'm the Chair of the Civil Aviation Authority.
Good morning, I'm Sophie O'Sullivan. I head up Future Safety and Innovation and I'm the Programme Director for the Future Flight Programme at the CAA.
Thank you.
And I'm Anna Bowles, and I'm the Head of Consumer Policy and Enforcement at the Civil Aviation Authority.
Welcome all, and we're grateful for your time this morning. Before we get into the main questions that we wanted to cover today, there's a couple of topical issues I'd like just to start off with. Firstly, obviously the situation in the Middle East has consequences for air travel, both for direct flights to the region, but also for long-haul flights that have to overfly. Just ask you to give any comments on any concerns you might have on the safety of those flights.
So, thank you, Chair. Clearly, the Civil Aviation Authority, aviation authorities across the world monitoring the situation extremely carefully. The hard lessons of experience over recent years show the risks of flying in what are active combat areas. So the system in relation to what happened over the weekend in the region, the system essentially worked as it should do, is that NOTAMs, notifications, were issued to avoid the airspace. Aircraft were rerouted to avoid that airspace. On occasions, aircraft were diverted to different locations to avoid landing in those areas. That caused clearly some disruption for passengers, but in the context of protecting passenger safety and the safety of the operation, then clearly that was the priority. So clearly it's a situation that we must continue to monitor very closely, both as the Civil Aviation Authority working extremely closely with the Department for Transport, who are essentially the lead in this area, and we are providing support. We make sure the communication channels are there so that airlines and operators are getting the information that they need, and that they are working closely with the Department for Transport as well. And we maintain close contact internationally through Eurocontrol within this region and more widely, just to make sure that we are sharing information and making sure that we don't put anybody at a risk as a result of those serious operations going on there.
Thank you. Clearly the situation is ongoing and may develop in different ways, but as things stand, you don't have any concerns about general safety?
I don't have concerns about safety. The system is operating as the system should in these cases, but as you rightly say, we must continue to monitor it closely, keep those communication channels open. We must make sure that this doesn't somehow become seen as just, well, it's routine. It's not routine. It's something we must all focus in on, and I know everybody is.
Thank you. Grateful for that. And another safety-related issue that's topical are certain aircraft manufactured by Boeing. I appreciate the sort of most prominent example are not aircraft used by UK or, I believe, European operators. But do you have any more general concerns about the safety of Boeing aircraft at the moment?
Well, the issues which have arisen have been very clearly flagged up internationally. What are we doing about it? Firstly, we're maintaining a very close relationship, as we always do, with the Federal Aviation Administration in the US. I've spoken personally to the administrator there. The deputy administrator is actually visiting the UK next week, and we will continue the discussions there because they are very clearly in the lead in the work that the remedial work which needs to be done with Boeing. Within the Civil Aviation Authority ourselves, we have a continuing oversight and monitoring and assurance role for Boeing operations in the UK, be that maintenance and repair operation or indeed those who operate Boeing aircraft. We continue to exercise that function. We have specifically put additional resources in this area just to make sure that everything is, we are monitoring everything you would expect us to monitor. We will be taking the results of our findings into our discussions with the Federal Aviation Administration next week. So that is all in place. In terms of is it safe to fly in Boeing aircraft? Well, we would not allow them to fly if we do not judge them to be safe. And that's the action we've taken. It's the action that the FAA have taken. And we have a track record here when we had the 737 MAX 8 issue of a few years ago. Then the UK, I believe, was the first nation in Europe to actually ground those aircraft until the remedial action that had been taken. So we're monitoring very closely, but say if it's a Boeing aircraft and it is flying at the moment, then the public can be assured that we have done our work and we judge it to be safe.
That's very helpful, thank you. Fabian, if we could.
Thank you, Chair. So, Stephen, I wonder if you could set out what you've achieved in your first 4 years as chair of the CAA, and is there anything you wish you'd done differently in those 4 years?
A great question, thank you. I think the first thing I would say is I wouldn't personally characterise it as what I've personally achieved over the last 4 years. I am just one part of the Civil Aviation Authority. My job is to lead the board, and the board's job is to lead the organisation. And what the CAA has achieved is down to colleagues across the organisation. It's them who have put in the hard work and the effort. So I rather think my role is just about creating the right environment for colleagues to succeed. In terms of what has the CAA achieved over the last 4 years, I'd put it in sort of three headline categories, I think. First one is fulfilled our statutory responsibilities in relation to safety, security and consumer interests, which sounds a little bit, well, that's just what you do, isn't it? But I think we just need to underline how much hard work and effort it requires to be relentlessly effective in that role. And that has been conducted against a backdrop of, COVID, and I joined, about CAA about 6 weeks after the first lockdown started. So managing through that COVID period and then the recovery from COVID and making sure that was safe and trying to minimise the consumer disruption, and perhaps we can talk more about that later on. And there's been a whole range of other issues. I mean, we've just been speaking about some of the particular aircraft types. There's things like the NATS incident of August last year. I mean, things happen in the day-to-day, and we try our best to avoid them. But then the challenge for the CAA, the test for the CAA, is how well do we respond to them? And I would say we respond to them very well in that period. Not that we're perfect, but we are a learning organisation and we try and make sure that we develop. So I'd put that, if you like, doing the day job and fulfilling our statutory responsibilities as number one achievement. I think the second one is about external validation of that. It's all very well for us, the CAA, as an independent regulator, to say this is what we think we have achieved, but we need to be tested ourselves. And we are tested by audit. The two key ones were the International Civil Aviation Organization audit, which was concluded in the early part of last year, which was important because it was the first audit of the UK safety system by ICAO post our withdrawal from the European Air Safety Agency. So this was a key test for us. I'm pleased to say that we scored very well on that, and it ensured that we are in the top tier for safety of aviation nations around the world. So that was really important for us. The second test was the government commissioned independent review, an arm's length body review of the CAA. That reported around about this time last year, and that was more about, well, how does the CAA do its business? Now, the headline from that was that the CAA remained a highly effective safety regulator, so good in that sense. But it did also highlight a number of areas where we could be improve and be even better. And we absolutely accept them. We accepted the recommendations and said we are a learning organisation, and there's a number of areas which we are now taking forward the recommendations. The third and final area that, what does success look like is growth. We continue to be a growing organisation. I reflect back to when I took over as chair 4 years ago to where we are now. We are 40% bigger, 40% more people in the Civil Aviation Authority. Now, that's not because we've become some sort of bloated regulator. The reason is that we have our regulatory perimeter is expanding. We have taken on responsibility for space regulation. We're now the UK space regulator. We now have a growing role in aviation sustainability, which we didn't have before. Future flight is a really strong growing area that continues to expand rapidly with new propulsion systems and new types of air platform. There's also the re-establishing ourselves as a sovereign regulator following their withdrawal from the European Air Safety Agency. That has added to the number of colleagues in the organisation. So we are a larger organisation with more responsibilities. We have a bigger budget, but I'm pleased to say in real terms our charges to our customers in real terms have actually reduced. So again, we're not just sort of transferring our costs to somebody else. But that growth is really important now vested in a new strategy for the organisation, which reflects all of those new challenges that we have, also reflects our lessons from the ALB review, lessons from recent experience, etc. Clearly, I'm not going to go through the strategy in detail, but essentially our strapline is protecting people, enabling aerospace. That's what we do as an organisation. So quite a long answer there.
It needed to be, obviously. I wasn't there, but in your pre-appointment hearing, you set out 3 priorities. I'm not sure if you remember what they were. I can remind you. But I wondered how your priorities changed over the last 4 years. And can you set out your priorities for the next 4 years? Do you want me to remind you what you said at the time?
Probably best if you do, actually, just to make sure.
The first priority you said was to ensure that the CAA continues to be a world-class aviation regulator. Well, you've pretty well answered that, actually. And continues to enjoy the trust and confidence of government, the public, airlines and aviation internationally. The second priority you said was to deal with the rapidly changing environment that we're in at the moment. And again, you've touched on that in your first response. And you mentioned, of course, the most pressing part being the COVID restart and recovery. The third priority you said was concerning the people in the CAA. And again, you've touched on that, but I wouldn't mind some more detail. You said in order to deliver the 2 earlier priorities, I need to make sure that we continue to have outstanding people who have the skills, experience and capabilities to deliver all that. So could you perhaps expand on your opening remarks in relation to those 3 priorities that you stated 4 years ago?
So, in relation to the first 2, hopefully I touched on those earlier. In relation to the people side, it remains critical for the CAA. I mean, I often say that the CAA doesn't own anything really, apart from the intellectual and actual capacities and skills and experience of its people. That's what we add into the aerospace system. So making sure that our people we are able to recruit the right people, that we're able to induct them, train, develop and use their experience and give them opportunities in the organisation to realise their potential is absolutely vital. I would say, as anybody in the aerospace enterprise, in fact, any part of the economy which relies on highly skilled people, it's a challenge. These are skills which are not in abundant supply, and we're in a highly competitive market. But I would say that we have been successful as a result of a lot of initiatives in the human resources function within the CAA and colleagues across the organisation put a lot of effort into making sure that we are both an attractive employer and that we are able to bring people into the organisation.
I'll interrupt you a moment and just ask you on the skills issue. Is that because we're not training enough people in the right skills that you need for your organisation? And if that's the case, how are you doing at attracting people from abroad?
So in terms of across the aerospace enterprise, the skills that we are looking for, are being looked for by everybody. Traditionally, we recruit from the sector that we regulate if they're more experienced people, and if we're looking at people with high technical skills, they're just in demand. What do we offer that's in response? Well, people do want to be part of the regulatory function. They want to use those wider skills. They want to develop themselves in those areas. I like to think that we create a working environment that people want to be a part of. There's a really strong sense in the CAA of people wanting to do the right thing, public service. I mean, I'm absolutely confident that everybody who works in the CAA on a day-to-day basis, when they wake up and they go to work, it's so that they can make the aerospace safer and better. A real sense of mission and purpose there. So we can offer all of those things. We put a lot of effort into advertising ourselves as an organisation. We sponsor graduate recruitment programs. We sponsor STEM skills. We bring people in at the base level. We don't just bring them in higher up in the organisation. We've got a very extensive outreach program, and those who participate in the outreach program, from me through the board right through the entire structure of the CAA, we make sure we do that across the country, and it's been successful as a result of a lot of hard work. To give you just some flavour of it, 42% of the Civil Aviation Authority have been recruited in the last 3 years. It's a lot of people that we've managed to recruit and bring in. What we also need to do is make sure we retain them, because they develop really valuable skills, particularly in relation to future flight. Then if you're on LinkedIn and you've got 3 years regulatory experience in future flight and new technologies in the Civil Aviation Authority, people are interested in you. So we need to. There's benefits of people cycling from the regulator into the industry and vice versa, but we also need to make sure that we retain the skills. And I'm sure Sophie will want to.
Your staff turnover is acceptable.
So it's about 8% turnover every year, which is pretty much where it was pre-COVID, and is significantly better than a lot of other high-tech organisations.
Can I move us on to something else? Because in your pre-appointment hearing, we asked you to outline the weaknesses of the CAA as an organisation. I don't expect you to remember everything you said 4 years ago, but you said you deferred your answer until you'd taken up the role. And I wondered what your view is now, because obviously you've told us about the strengths, and they're very good indeed. But I was wondering what those weaknesses were, if you'd found any, and what you're doing to address them if you believe there are any.
And I do remember saying that at the time, and I guess it was the easier answer at the time, is to say I'll need to wait and see. I would say I wouldn't describe them as weaknesses, because that sounds like we have problems in the organisation. I'd describe it more as areas where we need to apply more emphasis than we might have done in the past. As the last 4 years have progressed, the area where I should say that our statutory regulatory duties, as I mentioned before, absolutely that's our focus. We don't take our eye off that ball at all. But what has markedly increased is this enabling aerospace part of our remit, is creating the right regulatory environment for new technologies and innovation, doing more in relation to outreach in STEM, more engagement with the sector that we recognise. That's where the biggest growth has been in our organisation. And so that, from the board down, there's been a lot of emphasis in that area. I think it's been successful. But you're asking about where do I see things going in the future. That continues to develop. It's not because there's, if you like, a playbook for this. Is here's how you act as a regulator in relation to eVTOL platforms or hydrogen-powered aircraft. This is new stuff. And so we need to develop the regulatory environment for that. We need to make sure we are able to play our part. And we need to be able to liaise with industry and not do their work for them, but ensure that they have the best environment to work on as they do what they do best. So that would be the sort of second area I would mention. The third area that we need to focus on, I would say, is about tempo and pace. And it very much relates to new technologies, but it also goes across the board, really. It goes from technologies right through the consumer interest. We don't have, if we ever did, but we certainly don't have now, the luxury of just taking our time. Now, taking our time allows us to sort of do things in the most considered way, but when you're dealing with innovative technologies, you need to work at a pace which ensures that you're not unnecessarily or inappropriately slowing the whole process down. Now, we'll slow the process down if we think we need to, because we're there to look after safety. But what we need to make sure is that our own internal processes don't slow things down inappropriately. Now, easy to say, that we should work at a faster pace. The challenge that the board has is, well, how do you articulate that to the organisation? It's just not just about saying to people, do it more quickly, because then there's the risk of cutting corners. But we need to make sure we are able to describe a way which says, make our decisions faster. Now, those decisions sometimes might be no, but make it faster. And that's what we constantly hear. When I speak to the sector, people don't criticise the CAA for the quality of the work that we do, which I think is a really great
testimony. Speed at which they do it.
It's the speed at which they don't really focus too much on the charges that we make. In fact, some of them say we'll pay you more if you can make decisions more quickly. So we need to work out how can you make decisions more quickly without undermining safety, public confidence, etc. That would be perhaps the biggest challenge that we have going forward.
That leads me neatly on to my next question, which is, on the 17th of July last year, the Department for Transport published its CAA review, and I wondered whether you could tell us what you learnt from that review, that CAA recent Public Bodies Review, and did any of the findings of that review concern you? For example, engagement with customers or confusion about the respective roles of the CAA and the Department for Transport.
So. Firstly, at the headline, we and I welcomed that review. We hadn't been reviewed by an independent review by government since about 2009. So it's really important to us that we had an external view of how we are doing as an organisation. We assess, audit other organisations constantly. We should expect to be assessed and audited ourselves. So we welcomed the review. The review took the best part of a year, so it was a pretty thorough piece of work from start right through to publication. At the publication, then, I mentioned earlier, headline was, the CAA remains a highly effective and internationally well recognised and respected regulator. So that's a really important headline. Below that, a number of recommendations. We accepted all of those recommendations. The ones that I think which were most sort of pertinent to me is there were recommendations in relation to our accountability, how we work with the Department for Transport. I think we've got an excellent working relationship with the Department for Transport, but there needs to be more clarity and setting down of exactly how that worked, and means for the department to ensure that they could hold the CAA to account. An independent regulator, but also held to account in a number of areas. So that work is very firmly now in hand, and most of the recommendations there have already been put in place. The second one you mentioned about engagement with the sector. I confess slight disappointment there because I thought we'd put a lot of effort into engagement with the sector, but that was really the value of having an independent look, because there's what we thought we were doing and then there's what the sector thought we were doing. So we have redoubled our efforts in that area through a range of different fora. To take just one example, 2 weeks ago today, the CEA board spent 2 days in South Wales having a board meeting, engaging with local industry and a whole range of other stakeholders in the Cardiff area as part of that outreach programme. All the feedback we've got is from those sorts of visits. I mean, we've also been to Glasgow, Edinburgh, Northern Ireland and Belfast. It's very positive. So that's well in hand. There were recommendations in relation to how we looked after consumers. And that one was a concern to me and the board, because again, we thought we were putting a lot of effort into there, but into that area, and we do. But I think what it showed is that we need to do more to make that our effort coherent, visible, and to put some sort of, if you like, metrics against it. Is we were doing all of these activities, but how did we know they were successful? Were they actually meeting consumers' expectations? Now, we have a consumer panel, an independent consumer panel who advise us on that. The review also said we should make more use of that panel, so we've definitely got that in hand as well. And the rest of it we already had in production, but the review helped us bring to a conclusion a consumer strategy. I'm very happy to talk more about the detail, and Anna will be able to pick up on that. But it sets down very clearly some headline objectives of where we want to see improvement and how consumers are looked after and how we will measure that.
And is there a timetable for those remaining recommendations to be implemented? Or do you feel you're on the way to that right now?
We are definitely on the way. The majority of recommendations, I would say, are in place. The one that I was just going to come on to, which will take longer to bring to conclusion, was in how we deal with our customers. Now, consumers are people who, they're, if you like, they're contractors with somebody in the industry, airlines in particular. Our customers are those who are licensed by us, who pay us for a service. Again, we already recognise we needed to do more there. The particular thing that the ALB review focused on was you're too slow on your digitisation of how you are doing your work, and that back to that time point. And so part of the review was identifying efficiencies, financial efficiencies. We were able to secure the reinvestment of those financial efficiencies into a comprehensive customer experience and modernisation project. That started now, but that will take probably at least 3 years to roll out fully, partly because it's complex. It's an IT-based program. We need to make sure we get it right, particularly when we're talking about licensing and certifying things which are safety related. So we need to progress with sufficient tempo, but in a suitably cautious way to make sure we don't put anything at risk unintendedly. So that customer side was really important. But as I say, it was all baked into financial efficiency. We took 5% out of our operating costs for doing that reinvestment, and we also committed for 3 years that our scheme of charges, what people pay us, would only increase at inflation minus 1%. and we're holding to that. And I think in the current environment, to be able to say you're doing a real terms reduction in your charges to those that you regulate is it's a lot of work from us to make that happen, but it's a really good because it makes sure that we are a financially taut and efficient organisation, which is what the committee and our customers expect of us.
A final question, which requires only a very brief answer, is if you're sitting here in 3 years' time, would you be confident that those recommendations that you've implemented now will have been achieved by then? And nobody can predict the future, but on the balance of probability, yes.
Well, my extension is for 4 years, unless the committee has news for me. But in 3 years, but in 3 years' time, yes. And those who are charged with delivering the programme are very clear that the board is focused on achieving those timelines.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Fabian. Last month you published your new strategy. The previous one in 2021 was understandably about supporting the sector to recover from the pandemic. You've now looking ahead. What does that mean in practice? Not just for your customers, but for their customers, the people who fly.
Yeah. So the aim of the strategy, it clearly is partly internally focused. It's to make sure that we cohere the organisation. But it is, as you suggest, saying to our customers and to consumers, this is our focus for the organisation. These are our strategic focus areas. These are our annual strategic objectives. This is what we are trying to achieve, and it's essentially inviting people to hold us to account. We will hold ourselves to account, but we also want all of our stakeholders to be able to say, well, this is what you said you were going to do. How is it going? I'd say one that particularly in focus, and you mentioned about consumers there, is we want consumers to see that not only does the CAA have these responsibilities, that we have them, but how are we doing in terms of delivering those responsibilities? How do we intend as an organisation to match growing consumer expectations? And from a CAA perspective, we welcome growing consumer expectations. We want people to be constantly trying to raise the bar there. It's I think it's been well received so far. I appreciate it's a strategy, and people look at it and go, okay, well, that's all very interesting, but what's actually happening? I guess I would say, well, judge us by the results, and we will publish things like on the consumer side is when we're saying we will measure how we're succeeding, we will publish that information. We seek to be as open and transparent an organisation as possible, and it's all part of ensuring we communicate, because we will only be successful if we communicate as an organisation.
So if you were here in front of us in a year's time, what would success look like in implementing that strategy?
So, I could, perhaps it would be more helpful if I were to write back to the committee, and I can list those individual performance measures that we are looking at as an organisation. But I would just group them as those sort of headlines is we want to be relentlessly effective in the day job of safety and security and consumer interests. We want to have a demonstrably strong response to emerging issues, and there will be emerging issues, and we can't predict all of them. We want to show that we can do that. We want to the sector to feel that the CAA is enabling, is that it is an engaging organisation, excuse me, which is very much focused on both future flight, new technologies, and say creating the right environment, providing the right sort of guidance, shaping their efforts without doing their work for them. We want to make sure as an organisation we have the people that we need in order to be able to deliver that. So say perhaps suggest, Chair, that if I was to set down some of those things and write and say, here are some specifics, and I would very much welcome the opportunity in a year's time to sit down and hold us to account and mark our homework, if you like.
That would be very helpful, thank you. I'd like now to turn to the interim report on last year's air traffic control incident. And Zara,
thank you, Chair. So Stephen, I'm going to ask the other two witnesses just so you can have a bit of water and a break. But what are your thoughts on the interim report into the air traffic control incident last year?
Can I cover that one?
There you go. I was giving you that.
I really appreciate it. Because obviously Sophie is more future flight and innovation. There is a link into the consumer side of things, and I will turn to Anna shortly. But if I could perhaps just do the headline. So it is an interim report. The final report is in production at the moment. We're aiming to get that out as soon as practicable. It is an independent panel, so I'm not going to lean on them too heavily. They need to do the work and produce the evidence that they need. Nevertheless, the interim report is out there. What are the striking bits of the report? Well, firstly, we've got to acknowledge the severe disruption which was caused. By our estimated, either directly or indirectly, up to 700,000 passengers were affected. So this is major disruption right at the peak of the holiday season. So that is the baseline. What the interim report pointed to is the challenges of resilience in the system. Because if you have an effect up to 700,000 people affected for an incident which essentially lasted for around about 6 hours before we were into the recovery phase, then that shows that the system is running pretty tight. So that's something that's got to be looked at further, is if the system, I'm not criticising the system is running in a taut way, but you need to make sure that you have some sort of resilience plan in place in case things go wrong, because things do go wrong. I think the second issue was, and these are not in priority order, is communication. That was clearly flagged up, and I expect that there will be more recommendations in relation to that in the final report. There were issues about, or the interim report talks about what contingency planning is done, how does the system cope with these things when they do occur, and I expect there will be recommendations in relation to how you exercise that contingency planning, who has overall responsibility, etc. The interim report rightly points to a lot in terms of the impact on consumers, how they are communicated with, how are they handled in these really difficult situations, and I expect there'll be quite a few recommendations in that area. And then I think finally the report talks about the financial liability side, and I know that generates a lot of attention, particularly from the airlines. I think just at this stage it's the independent panel has to do more work and just wait and see what their final recommendations are in this area. It's a complex area, and we need to make sure that there aren't unintended consequences with some of the potential paths that we could look at going forward. So I haven't talked about, if you like, the technical side of what went wrong. The interim report talks to that. NATS themselves have published an interim report in relation to the technical side of it. Then I'm certain that technical problem that was experienced on the day has been addressed. But clearly we will consider closely are there other technical issues involved here. It plays into the resilience. I'm not saying that there are the ones there, but we were taken by surprise by that technical issue, is we need to be confident that the processes are sufficiently rigorous that we can spot them to the greatest extent possible before they actually become a problem.
So you've touched on the fact that the Nats have addressed the technical issue there. What actions will the CAA be taking to the interim report? Now, I appreciate the final report hasn't come out, but what actions will you be taking now prior to the report based on the interim?
So when the technical problem was identified and when the technical solution was put in place, then clearly we got an overview assurance role. We had satisfied ourselves that had actually taken place. In terms of now waiting for between the interim and the final report, there's nothing we identify needs to be done right now. If we thought it needed to be done right now, then we would intervene. But we'll just wait in the final report and see what it says about technical issues, investment in technical capabilities, resilience planning, contingency planning when things go wrong. So we don't see anything that needs to be tackled immediately. But I just wait to see what the final report says.
Why have there been no multi-agency simulation exercises?
I think it's a good question, and that's something that the interim report flags up. And when I look at it personally, what I can see from the Civil Aviation Authority is when we have major issues in the aerospace system, then the CAA does spend a lot of time not necessarily acting as the glue in the system, but talking to all parts of it, talking to government and the Department for Transport, talking to airports, talking to airlines, trying to push out information to consumers. We do have a sort of a central role when things happen. I think it's entirely logical to say, well, if you have that sort of role, well, what happens in terms of exercising and doing some contingency planning in advance of it actually happening on the day? That's flagged up in the interim report, and instinctively I feel that there's definitely something there. More ability to just scenario play, work out how it's going to happen. It's not about the CAA, if you like, taking over and trying to run the entire system. It doesn't work that way, but testing out things like communications channels, when do you tell people, who do you tell? That's the sort of thing that I think we could easily scenario plan and exercise in advance.
So in that case, have any been planned?
Not at this stage, because what I wouldn't want to do is start doing that work now in advance of getting the considered views of the independent panel who are liaising across the sector. We want to make sure that we shape this and get it right. Now, that doesn't mean to say that if something goes wrong in the aviation system today, that there will be no ability to respond. We absolutely will respond, as happened back in August, as has happened in a whole range of incidents. This is about responding better in the future and quicker and more efficient, and making sure that consumers are better looked after in the process. And so I think it feels to me right that rather than, if you like, leap in and do something in advance of having all the evidence and data gathered by the independent panel, we should wait for that independent panel to report, and then we will take the action from there. Not least in that is that the CAA just, if it were to be us, we can't just assume a role. We need to not necessarily be given some sort of hard-edged authority, but we have to have the consent of all the interested parties and stakeholders. They need to feel that they will be adequately representative in whatever that mechanism might be. So I think we need to approach this in a measured way, but that doesn't mean we're not able to respond today if something goes wrong.
And in the interim report, it also says that some of the recommendations from the 2014 CAP 1515 report haven't been actioned. Can I ask why that is?
So I did check up on this, and that 2014 report, all the recommendations were actioned by NATS. I know that they had independent third-party assurance that they commissioned to make sure that they'd put those recommendations or implemented those recommendations, and I know that the CAA then itself subsequently assured that those recommendations had been put in place. So the 2014 actions were done, but each of these instances is unique in its own way. And so there will be new recommendations. Well, there are, as you can see, new emerging recommendations from last year's incident. Also, the environment changes as well. And I mentioned earlier about, from a CAA perspective, looking after consumers, growing expectations. We want to do more and more for consumers. And so I fully expect that the final recommendations from this latest review will be stronger in relation to looking after consumers than might have been the case in 2014. This is part of, obviously the aerospace endeavour is, things unfortunately do go wrong. When they do go wrong, we learn the lessons, we implement recommendations, we strengthen our capabilities. But it's a highly complex thing, and other things happen, and we need to take a new set of recommendations and take them forward.
Just to clarify then, are you stating that all of the recommendations have been actioned from
2014?
So,
yes.
Yes, okay. Because you mentioned about NATS, so there's no other recommendations that haven't been implemented?
Not from 2014.
Right, okay. And the interim report highlighted weaknesses in the airline communications, which you've mentioned for passengers. What other steps are you taking to address this?
I think it's a little bit, as I was saying, is that we need to make sure that we have taken all of the evidence and got all of the data before we firm up recommendations and take action. I know, and it's highlighted in the panel's interim report, there's a slight sense of frustration about their ability to understand the data of exactly what was the passenger experience, what were the consumer issues, how were they handled on the day. And so they have commissioned some third-party work through Transport Focus to give them that quality of data to really understand what happened to passengers on the day and what the shortcomings were. That information wasn't available for the interim report. I haven't personally seen that, and I wouldn't expect to, because it's an independent panel that we commissioned. But I expect in the final report it will have a much greater level of granularity, detail, and understanding of what was the impact on passengers, and then we will implement the recommendations from there. But in terms of what do we do on a day-to-day basis right now, in advance of those recommendations, to look after passengers in these circumstances, I mean, perhaps that's one I could hand over to Anna, who looks after the consumer part in the CAA.
Absolutely. So we have regular conversations with all of the airlines, and they inform us that they're giving the correct communications to consumers. Our source of information around that is somewhat limited, because we have limited information gathering powers, and that's one of the increased powers that we have. We're seeking, and the DfT has expressed support for when parliamentary time allows. It requires primary legislation change. We get information directly from consumers when we receive complaints, and we use that information. And actually what we see is in the majority of cases, people are being given information when they're needed. In the circumstances that happened around the NATS event, it was a very extreme situation, and I think the feedback that we are hearing is that perhaps the communication wasn't as frequent as people would have liked, because there was uncertainty for a prolonged period of time for some people who were maybe stuck in resort for a period of time, and so we've had conversations around how airlines manage these situations in these more extreme circumstances. I think for more day-to-day delays and cancellations, we're relatively assured that airlines do communicate passenger rights to them, but these more extreme situations, we're having conversations around how that can improve.
And just to come back on that, am I right in thinking in the interim report it states about all of the airlines having a basic leaflet that comes from the CAA to state the passengers' rights? Now, whilst I understand it's an interim report, surely something like that could be implemented prior to the final report coming out, just to make things easier for everyone involved.
So all airlines are required to provide passengers with details of their rights. They don't have to do that in any particular set format. We have got a leaflet out there, but many airlines choose to do it in their own way. So actually many airlines increasingly will use an app. So people will mostly book their flights using an app, and then they will send messages to passengers on the app, and that will link through to a website so you can get all the details. So it's often not a paper-based leaflet that gets handed out, primarily because people are often not at an airport actually when they're getting this information. They're getting it on the way to the airport, or they're getting it in their hotel, or they're getting it at home before they leave.
Going back to the incident last year, there was a lot of people stuck at airports where that would have been a very easy thing to have been distributed for the airlines, rather than the mixed communication that was happening during the incident.
So it's something that potentially could have happened at that time, and it wasn't in place. There isn't a requirement to hand out leaflets. There's a requirement to provide information, and that's where the majority of airlines use the electronic system. And in the majority of cases, that works. I have to say also that there are challenges with technology around that as well, because when people are abroad, for example, you might be in an airport and you can't access Wi-Fi, or you don't have any data left on your mobile phone.
You don't need Wi-Fi for a leaflet?
No, absolutely. Although you would need to have that leaflet in all of those different locations, and that isn't a requirement at the moment.
I think what I'm trying to say with the interim report is, whilst I understand, yes, it's an interim report and you're waiting for the final report, surely there's some actions that can be taken now, rather than just kind of a wait-and-see game.
I mean, there's certainly things that we can look into around a leaflet. I think there are...
I don't just mean the leaflet in general, I mean the broader report and what it states. I understand waiting for the final report, but right now you can kind of see where the report is going to be able to implement some actions.
I'm very happy to take that away. I mean, as was being covered, is that this isn't, if you like, a new requirement. This is already an obligation on airlines to provide information to customers in these situations. What the interim report has flagged up is that didn't happen in all cases back on in August last year. I'm perfectly happy to take that away and see whether there's anything more that we could do in the interim. But as I say, it's not. In large measure, it's saying to airlines, you have to do this already. We require you to do this. Make sure you're doing it. I think your comment is perhaps particularly timely, given that we're approaching the busiest time of the year in the holiday season. So perhaps we can do a little bit more there.
And Anna, you mentioned about the powers that you currently don't have.
Yes.
And one of the things that you would like to have, and you've been working with the department on that, what other powers would you say are necessary for you to be able to do what you need to?
When I think of increased enforcement powers around in the consumer sphere, I think we need increased information gathering powers so that we are able to identify incidences of non-compliance, and then increased enforcement powers, because at the moment the powers that we have can take quite a long time to go through the process of taking action. So we experienced that last year with Wizz Air when we took enforcement action against them. It was actually a relatively straightforward process, but it's still quite timely even in those relatively straightforward circumstances. So it took until we started having conversations with them around the December time, and it wasn't until June that we had undertakings that were put in place. That enforcement action we consider to be really quite successful, but the output of that is that WIS had to relook at the communications they had actually to and the policies that they had around providing welfare and assistance to passengers, and so we are comfortable that the communications they provide now are accurate, and that will benefit future consumers. But we also required them to undertake enhanced measures, and those measures required them to go back and look at a very large number of claims that had been submitted to them over the previous 2 years, and as a result of that, a significant amount of money, so about an additional £1.24 million was refunded to passengers in respect of welfare and assistance claims that they had put in. So that process was relatively straightforward. It still took a year, and for some people that's refunds that they hadn't received for hotel accommodation. We have no ability to fine, for example, with around that. So fining powers, I think, would be helpful, and also provide a disincentive to behave in certain ways.
So there's no time frame for them to actually have to respond to that with the powers that you've currently got as well? So
had WIS decided not to sign the undertaking, for us to force them to do that would have required us taking them to court.
Right. Okay. So any others would you like to?
I think it's been well covered, and particularly that point about data gathering as well. The point that we consistently stress here is that we're not trying for, if you like, CAA exceptionalism in these powers. Essentially, all we're asking for is equivalent powers to what other regulators already have. It is bringing us into line. It just gives us a strengthened armoury, and it should allow us to move more quickly in pursuit of consumers' interests. Now, as has already been covered, the government has already been very clear that they support that. We just look forward to it actually, being moved into practice, and come back to that point of rising consumer expectations, which we support. And we need to ensure that our statutory powers match that rising consumer expectation. Otherwise, consumers for whom the holiday is, perhaps one of the largest expenses of the year, a really key event, I don't think that they would want us, the CAA, to have lesser powers than they would see elsewhere in their lives.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Graham, turn to you next.
Thanks, Chair. Just developing at that point about additional powers, and going back to 2022, when the government carried out a consultation on aviation consumer policy reform, and they asked for your views, for the CAA's views about powers and enforcement. And subsequently, the then Minister of State for Transport, Jessie Norman, said that the department were making a commitment to legislate when parliamentary time allows, and based upon the outcome of the consultation. Were you disappointed that the government haven't made parliamentary time in order to give you the additional powers that you were seeking?
I would disappointment would be one way of phrasing it, but I'm not sure that would help. It's just simply that recognition that we needed more powers was welcome. I don't obviously have that insight into the pressures on parliamentary time and priorities. I think it's just simply for us to continue saying that this is important for us in the performance of our statutory duties, what we're being asked to do. We can do better than we're doing at the moment. Clearly, it's for the government to decide where that stacks up in relation to a range of other priorities. I wouldn't wouldn't characterise it as disappointment. It's just simply, well, we need to keep reiterating and restating the case. We talked earlier on about the arm's length body review. It was run through in that context as well.
I don't think I'm giving away any confidence or secrets to say that in general the committee are a bit disappointed that quite a number of outstanding issues weren't addressed in a transport bill. I mean, some specifics have been, but I wonder if I might just ask Anna Bowles about the consumer interest and what is the CAA doing in terms of discussions with government. You mentioned that you were seeking extra powers to protect consumers. Is there anything that you can do short of legislation to mitigate the current deficiencies in the powers that the CAA have to protect consumers?
So we've certainly undertaken an exercise where we've reviewed our powers to see if there's any additional things that we can do without the legislative action that has been requested. And we have conversations with the DFT on a regular basis. I think that there's things like the leaflet that you've talked about. There's things that we can put on our website to make sure that consumers are informed, and we are undertaking a review of our website actually as part of our broader work to make sure that we're providing consumers with as much information as we can. But beyond that, we just can. The information gathering powers, I think, is a really key part for me.
Can you give us an example? When you say information gathering powers, just explain, because I'm a bit dim.
I have no data on how many complaints are made to any airline in the UK, and what those complaints are made for, and how airlines respond to those complaints. That would be incredibly useful data for me to try and identify where things are going wrong and where we need to focus our attention.
So perhaps just sort of in terms of what other things do we do is we use, if you like, reputation. That's clearly very important, and airports and accessibility is something that we take clearly very seriously. And we essentially publish a league table on performance of airports in relation to accessibility. Now, there's no sort of real, as far as I'm aware, legislative underpinning for doing that, but nobody really wants to be low down that sort of table. And I want
to ask you about that, but I just want to clear because as part of our scrutiny of HS2, the committee actually visited Birmingham and we went to Birmingham International Airport. Yep. Now, I know it's not regulation as such, maybe it's guidance, but it was, forgive me, in relation to the installation of a new generation of scanners. Mm-hmm. And there were some concerns about the time frame for that. Clearly it would be a tremendous benefit to passengers because you can pass through much more quickly, and the restrictions in relation to containers with liquids in and so on. They don't apply because the scanners can pick all those up. But just in relation to complaints from passengers, is that particularly about timings and cancellations? I know that there's an issue with the new algorithms in terms of booking flights, and if you're looking for a getaway, and then you're looking at the airline for prices, and then when you log in a second time, it knows you've already logged in, and the price the second time is much higher. Is that anything that is within the purview of the CAA, or is that it's simply about times and flights and frequencies and delays?
So there are responsibilities, and there are pieces, there are requirements in place around price transparency.
Right.
So airlines need to be very clear that they're including all the mandatory fees within their baseline prices. But in terms of algorithms driving differentiated pricing, that's not something that would fall within our remit.
Are you familiar with it? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I've heard of it, but I'm not aware that it happens in practice.
It does, believe me, it does. Can I ask about new developments? Maybe I should ask Sophie O'Sullivan about this. Following on from the installation of the new scanners and so on. Is there likely to be disruption? I mean, we saw in Birmingham the installation was going ahead. I think the scanners were being manufactured in Germany by Siemens. I think it was. Is it anticipated that that'll cause disruption during the installation phase?
I think probably, Stephen.
Yeah, so Sophie's area is more about the future of flight, as in new technologies, but perhaps I can cover the next generation security. First I should say that this is primarily a Department for Transport lead, so we are supporting the department there. So decisions around implementations or delayed timelines, etc., are not the responsibility of the CAA. It's the Department for Transport, and that's where the principal discussions are going. In terms of the new technologies, though, then clearly, we speak to airports a lot. It is very capable new technology. The issue, as I am told by the airports, is not just it's more expensive. It is to do with really physical things. The equipment's heavy. You need to be clear where it goes. As you're installing it, then clearly that has an impact on current security arrangements. So you need to monitor that in relation to passengers. You need to train new staff. There are supply chain issues across the aerospace sector, and so there's a high demand for these new bits of kit. So the whole range of issues. Now, that's not me making excuses for airports, it's just this is the environment that they are working in. What we're really interested in is, though, clearly the consumer experience, the customer experience. We know security is one of those issues which takes time and can be disruptive for passengers. People see it as necessary, but it's not necessarily an easy part of their journey. If we can make that quicker and easier, then clearly we're very much in favour of it. The UK is actually pretty leading in this. And so the fact that we might not have complete UK-wide adoption for a little while yet, we're still on the leading edge of this technology. Other nations are having similar challenges. And we need to also be aware that the passenger journey isn't just the UK element. No. If you're going overseas, then you might find, you're back to plastic bags and the traditional thing. So it will take some time for international aviation to get to the point where we have all of this next generation technology there. Nevertheless, it does bring not just, if you like, ease for the passengers, it brings better security capabilities, and so we're very keen for that to happen as soon as practicable. As I say, I know the Department for Transport is really focused on this issue.
Just so that we're clear, the government's ground handling review, that's a Department for Transport initiative. And is the CAA involved in any way or just as a consultee?
So ground handling review, again, is in progress. We're not a consultee.
That's quite separate from the...
Yes, it's a separate thing. I wouldn't describe the CAA as a consultee. We are supporting and providing that essential connection into the DFT about what's the consumer interest, how does it fit into the rest of the aerospace system. At the headline, bringing ground handling into the system is absolutely appropriate. It's a critical part, and so it's an international initiative. ICAO are sponsoring this, the International Civil Aviation Organization. The expectation is that by 2026, then ground handling will fall within nations, not just the UK, the regulatory purview. So the CAA will have a responsibility for doing oversight and assurance of ground handling activity, and I think that's entirely appropriate.
I think perhaps it's another area where it's beneficial if we have standardisation and international cooperation.
And that's exactly why ICAO are driving this forward. I mean, aviation as a whole is a highly internationalised system, as you know. So we do what's right for the UK. That's our primary responsibility. But we have excellent relationships with across the international community. Just absolutely essential for everything that we do.
Gavin, if we could turn to you next.
Thank you much, Chair. If I move on to the future of flight, so we can finally bring in Ms O'Sullivan. I think clearly there are many future potential benefits with all the kind of area of work that you're currently undertaking, whether it's economic, societal or environmental. With eVTOLs, I've seen Project Caelus at Glasgow Airport, I've been in Orkney to see Project SATE, etc. etc. But we'll start with eVTOLs. What is, in your view, or what are the main hurdles for commercial use of eVTOLs? Do you think it lies with the regulators, the technology itself, the regulators, or elsewhere, perhaps with us?
Of course. So the advanced air mobility sector, which is what we use as an umbrella term for the eVTOLs that you're talking to, is a priority for the CAA. It's a key part of our future flight programme. And really the work we need to do, I would say, is two-pronged. So we are working closely with applicants so that they can certify the new types of airframes that they're working on. And the timescales there really are dependent on the applicant's ability to design, develop, deliver their platform, work in multiple iterations. Sometimes tests are passed, sometimes they're not. What we need to do is to make sure that we have the capability and the capacity to support those applicants, and that's a question that we come back to every year. And then the second prong of what we need to do is run a large-scale programme to deliver the policy changes that are required to create a proportionate regulatory framework. So to give you an example, if you are an existing aerodrome today and actually you would like to offer services to eVTOLs, then we need to put out the guidance to say how you would be what we're calling a vertiport. And we will be publishing that guidance this year in December. We're also working on guidance for aspects like ground handling for VTOLs, carrying passengers, refuelling, that type of thing. So we need a large-scale programme to deliver those policy changes, and that is part of our Future Flight programme. Future Flight is a programme that goes out till 2030. It's got 5 strategic outcomes that we're working towards to support government in that plan. Strategic outcome 2, 4 and 5 show how we want to progress towards a 2030 timeframe to scale up the use of VTOLs in the UK.
And you said in your answer that from a capacity point of view, something you review every year. I think so Stephen, you said earlier on that the growth in terms of capacity, or the work of the CAA and also the workforce, obviously, as a result, has grown largely, or at least in large part, due to the future of flight. Do you have enough resources at the moment, do you think, to allocate to development of eVTOL specifically?
So on eVTOL at the moment, we have 5 people that are dedicated to the applications that are currently coming in. And then looking at the large-scale change that I've talked to, the second part of the programme, we've got 70 people dedicated on the Future Flight programme right now. That's one of the largest programmes that we have on innovation. And what I would say is that right now we believe that is the right capacity, but we will continue to come back to that question. We have to look at market developments, how many applicants there might be, which elements of the sector we see growing within AAM, within RPAS. Okay. So we'll continue to come back to that. But right now, the answer is yes.
You think so? Obviously, we heard evidence before. I think we had Vertical and we had Ferrovial. I think Ferrovial, Brad Miller from Ferrovial was concerned that perhaps that UK is world leading, and we've seen this before, certainly as the 9 years I've been an MP, across so many sectors where UK is world leading in research and development, but when we get to that commercialisation stage, and sometimes that's regulations are getting away, sometimes it's government support, but we always seem to lose the commercialisation stage to other countries. So that's one of the reasons we're asking the questions. For instance, we just, in fact, it's going through it's just coming back from the Lords, I think, soon. We've just had the regulatory framework bill for automated vehicles. How far away are we from having a regulatory framework bill for eVTOLs, or perhaps unmanned aircraft, or future of flight more widely? Is that something that's in the near future, or are we not there yet for that?
So what I would say is the data that we have is that in the sectors of advanced air mobility and RPAS, we are not behind as a state. That's not what the data shows us. We will need a series of SI updates to do multiple changes for these sectors. So, for example, rulemaking for bespoke vertiports and operations, we're targeting the SI in late 2025. That's how the programme is formulated at the moment. We have a number of SIs that we need to work towards. But I come back to my earlier answer that this is a priority for the CAA. It's one of our largest programmes with multiple work streams going on at the moment. Already I can point to deliveries around what we're doing with some of our airspace structures to enable RPAS operations. I've talked to some of the vertiport guidance. So I wouldn't characterise that we are behind. We aren't perfect, to come back to Stephen's earlier phrase. We need to continue to learn, and we're doing that by working very much as part of the internationalised system through our NAA network, collaborating with the FAA, EASA on a regular basis.
And are you on target or very close to target for the 2025 certification of type eVTOL?
At the moment we are on track, yes, but I do come back to the time frame for certification of platforms is quite application dependent, and we must certify to a standard, not to a timeline, because that's how we ensure, enable aerospace but also protect the public.
If I can move on to drones, is the target for enabling demonstration of the BVLOS line of sight beyond the line of sight target? This year, is that on track?
Yes, I would say that's on track. What the first strategic objective is really about for RPAS is those demonstrations, as you say. So some of that is applicant dependent, similar to what I've said about VTOL. But what we need to do is ensure that there are the airspace structures and the proportionate regulatory framework to enable those demonstrations. So at the moment, there are three ways by which you can operate an RPAS. You can operate it within your visual line of sight, so you can see it as a remote pilot. It's fairly low risk operation. You can use other persons to extend your visual line of sight, or you can go beyond visual line of sight. The clue's in the name. To do that at the moment, we put something called a temporary danger area around the operation, which is really a form of segregation. What we're doing is we've put in place a new structure called a temporary reserve area. That's already live, and that is a structure by which you can test more complicated operations. You can look at how you do things such as detect other aircraft, avoid other aircraft, and that is critical to get us to a potential way of scaling up these operations and meeting the commercial ambitions of some of the applicants that we have.
Just looking at future flight and looking at the pathway, particularly the drone pathway for strategic outcome 1, 2024 is an extremely busy year. If you're looking at this particular graphic, and obviously a fair chunk of it is under the auspices of the CA. So you seem confident that you're going to fulfil your part of strategic outcome 1. Are you confident that the government and industry will fulfil their part of in 2024?
At the moment, I would say that we are collaborating and working very well together. What we need is to create a proportionate framework. We've also are launching next week a technical variation policy whereby effectively you can change your RPAS in a more rapid way if you're working in research and development. So our part is to make sure those airspace structures are there and that we have a proportionate regulatory framework. I think we are on track for that. There's a lot of interest from industry. We've already got 6 applicants in our temporary reserve area trial, and we're seeing around another 10 more. So our industry leaning into this, are they funded? Are they ambitious? Yes, it is our view. And government have given us an extremely large amount of funding to enable this, 15.6 million this year alone, and have a dedicated team. So what I can say to you, I can't speak on behalf of the whole of industry or government, of course, but what I do see is very positive signs from both parts of the sector.
And just before I move on to airspace modernisation, this is perhaps an unfair question, but given the potential economic benefits of eVTOL to the country, given the size of the potential size of the sector here, and the fact that you guys seem confident that you won't be standing in the way from a regulatory point of view, are you confident that the government or the DFT are as seized of the urgency of making sure that we in this place or the government are not standing in the way of that progress in the sector as well? Because we've seen it before. It's more probably Sir Stephen wants to stand in the way of that one, to be fair.
Yeah, I mean, just picking up on what Sophie said, I mean, judge by the actions, and government has given us not just the remit, but the resources to actually achieve it. So, no, I don't see anything standing in the way, as you put it, from that point. All I see is support. From a CAA perspective, then we are doing exactly what has been lined up. But just to underline, ultimately, what we are held accountable for is safety. And to emphasise that point is we don't regulate to a timeline, we regulate to a standard. So there is what we expect from industry is, we will describe the environment, we will describe the regulatory set, but we expect them to work on the evidence, understand the risks, show us how they're going to mitigate those risks, have a plan for doing it, which we can then assure. The onus is not on us to make it safe. The onus is on them to tell us how they believe it's safe, and then we will assure that plan. The other critical part to this as well is that this is fitting into an existing enterprise. There are a lot of airspace users out there already, and particularly in this part of the United Kingdom, it's busy airspace. And so what we need to make sure is not just what works for these new technologies, is what works for those new technologies and doesn't impact on the other sector. We need to integrate these new capabilities there. So it's not, if you like, just standalone and their individual little bit of new technology, and how is that looking, is how does it work for everybody else as well. These are the challenges. I mean, it's exciting. It's really, interesting work, expanding out. People talk about it's the next generation of aerospace technology. So it's exciting stuff, and we're on the leading edge of it.
Okay, thanks for that. Let's hope it's not that age-old phrase of when parliamentary time allows that gets in the way of any potential regulatory legislation. But if I could move on to airspace modernisation, which again I've been a long-time supporter, kind of agitator for. Clearly, airspace modernisation and airspace change is not entirely straightforward, but by some distance the easiest and significantly the cheapest way or element of decarbonising aviation, and it's taken, personal opinion, it's taken far too long. So why has progress not been why has more progress not been made on modernising UK's airspace?
So I'm happy to talk to that. So airspace modernisation obviously is our vision by 2040 to have cleaner and quieter and more effective flights. And as you say, because airspace in the UK is quite complex, you have to balance a range of stakeholders and their different use cases. We needed a long-term strategy that went out to 2040. But what that doesn't mean is that we are not going to deliver anything until 2040. So some of the examples that I've given today of temporary reserve areas, I can also talk about atypical air environments, are new airspace structures that enable innovation that are moving towards the direction of integration for the AMS. So delivery in the short and medium term is part of that. One of the things that the team are exploring, to give an example around sustainability, is free routing. So at the moment, if you go from A to B and you're on a fixed route, that doesn't give you the freedom to look at how could you deploy things like higher climbs, different queue management that could possibly have benefits in terms of noise, in terms of emissions, and sustainability, and how that is going to work within the AMS is going to be part of the update that we publish, part 3, this May, and there will be some deliverables around that we continue to work towards. So what I would say is, whilst the strategy is until 2040, what I hope some of the examples illustrate today is that doesn't mean delivery is out that far. We are doing deliverables in the short and the medium term.
You made the point that there's lots of competing factors from different stakeholders, etc., etc. Would you say that's the main issue, or there's obviously other potential issues, whether it's government funding, etc.? Is the main issue you've got lots of different people with lots of different asks at the moment, and if that is the case, would it require, or do you think it would be better if there was stronger lead in this? And again, I'm not pushing at the CA here. This possibly requires political lead in this respect. Would that help drive through some of that these competing factors?
Yes, I think it would. So if we look at the way airspace is managed at the moment, an airspace change, a sponsor will request a change. I think you know this. Give us the design, consult, and then we will make a decision. We have put in place a function called ACOG, the Airspace Change Organising Groups, a function of NEL, part of NATS that we regulate, that helps coordinate that change, but still effectively those changes are being made by individual sponsors. So in order to really think about how do you balance the competing interests, one of the topics that we are exploring, and we are in early stages of exploring this, is having something like a single design entity where you might have essentially a single controlling mind that can look at how you could holistically design airspace in the UK and balance out those requirements. We are looking at how you might do that, who might do that, what the funding might be. There'll be a consultation on that later in the summer. But to answer your question, how do you do that holistic airspace design and look at those competing different use cases is one of the things that we think is really critical to moving this forward.
Perhaps I just, from a CAA perspective, to the start of your question, I would say that this is one of perhaps the most complex thing to work through for the CAA over the coming years. Not because, if you like, from a technical perspective, we can do redesign and everything that works for aviation, but it impacts a lot of people. And in many ways we say it's analogous to is like the planning system here. People on the ground in particular are affected by this, and there will be a lot of competing interests. We, the CAA, can't do that by ourselves. It will be something that will need to be worked through very closely with the department and government to make those sort of decisions on something beyond just a technical basis. But I think it's one of the most complex things that we'll be dealing with over the coming years.
And I think that's correct, but you said it's not just for the CA, it's for everyone, but would you say it's for the CA, are the CA fundamentally responsible for making it a success, or do you feel that responsibility?
I don't think that it can't just be down to the CAA. We need to be careful here is that our role is an independent regulator assuring the system. So we need to make sure that we're not designing and operating and assuring that would be a conflict of interest for us. We have NATS, clearly, they have a key role here, and we assure and regulate them. We have air navigation service providers around the country at airports and other locations, and we assure them, this is truly a whole system issue. Because it's a whole system issue, then CAA has a vital leading role to play, but government and the department do as well. We can't do it by ourselves. Nobody can do it by themselves here.
No, I would agree. But if I can move on to the 2022 progress report on modernisation, it identified 6 initiatives as requiring attention. So can you perhaps give us an update? I think there might be another iteration of that report coming shortly, but can you give? So I don't know if you can give us headlines if that report has been finalised, but so can you give us an update on those areas that require attention?
So that report is due out at the end of April, so that's our annual update to the Secretary of State on how we're progressing with airspace modernisation. You're right, it was due out at the end of March. We delayed that by around 4 weeks because what we wanted to do was just ensure that aspects of the future flight plan that were published on the 18th of March were fully aligned with what was in Part 3 of the AMS. So that was the reason for the delay. And in that we will be outlining how we're going to be tackling topics such as detect and avoid. I've mentioned that today. Unified traffic management, SWIM. We'll be giving an update on those, and I can follow up with the 6 topics that you reference as to how we're getting on with those.
If you shortly. Could, in specific, what progress you've made on those 6 areas from the last report, if you could write to us, that would be fantastic. I just wanted to finish off on this. To what extent, and obviously you've made the point, we've spoken about airspace change, and the sponsors, and obviously with an airport in my constituency, I've been, I don't know how many times I've been through this now, or the process for a variety of reasons. But to what extent have the delays associated with airspace change affected or delayed overall airspace modernisation?
Talk that one. So I think what I would say is, in some ways they are quite separate, because we have the separate sponsors. You know, a sponsor will come and ask for an airspace change, and airspace modernisation is looking at the asset all up, essentially, and how we want to modernise it.
It's part of the overall aims, though, of modernising airspace, but I know it's two separate work streams, as it were, but with the same overarching aim in terms of modernising our airspace.
Exactly, and if you have an airspace change that wants to do something that is going to have benefits in terms of sustainability, integration, that's obviously working towards our 2040 airspace modernisation strategy. So we have just relaunched what we call CAP 1616, which is the airspace change process itself. We took some time to look at all the consultation feedback that we'd had through various airspace changes to update that. And what we've done in this iteration is we've separated out the guidance and the regulation, which should make it, we think, more user-friendly, more accessible. And then we also have a faster version of the airspace change for low-impact changes. So we have listened to the feedback around delays, and we have to obviously balance consultation, those impacted by a change, but where we're deeming one as a low impact, there will be a faster process.
Okay, thank you.
Jack, you had a
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to follow on a little bit from what my colleague Mr Newlands has mentioned with regards to that report, because it did paint a very poor picture, I fear, of what progress has actually been made. And not only were 6 initiatives of the 15 rated as requiring attention, a further 6 initiatives were assessed as having major issues. So only 2 were on track and 1 had been implemented. So really what I'm keen to know is the next report that's due out going to paint a better picture of progress than we saw in the previous 12 months?
So what I would say to that is what we have seen that is markedly different from previous financial years is the programme for future flight and airspace modernisation and how they're working together. And that's why today I've been able to point to things such as the temporary reserve area, atypical air environment. These are aspects of airspace modernisation that are taking us on the demonstrate, scale, sustain pathway to enable innovators. We also have funding from government, which I've referenced in an earlier answer, which is much larger than we've received before, which is going across future flight, which bridges airspace modernisation and what we need to do for innovators. We're not perfect, to come back to an earlier answer, and there are learnings we need to do. Airspace is very complex because there are different users, so sometimes if you think you've taken one step forward with what you might do with the RPAS sector, you might get some responses from the GA sector that are not so favourable. You have to balance all those things together, which is why it's quite complex to move forward rapidly. But the next stage of the report will be able to talk to some of the deliverables I've outlined today and what we're doing with that additional funding.
So is it going to paint a better picture or not?
I would say it's going to paint a picture that will give you some more deliverables on what we're doing with the funding.
Right.
But ultimately, I would leave that assessment to your good selves.
Maybe you'd like to come in, Chair.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, getting a debate about what does better look like. I mean, this is an evolving process. As I mentioned, it is complex, and as we do more, we learn more, and sometimes we end up with more actions having learned more. I think just to follow up on the earlier offer is on those specific 6 areas, very happy to write back to the committee and say, here's our assessment of where those are at the moment. And to do the cross-check that we give sufficient emphasis for that, those 6 areas that we reported last time when we do the report that we're going to publish at the end of this month, just to make sure that we close that off properly.
Stephen, are you concerned about actually whether this is achievable and deliverable, given the hiccups that we have seen? This has been going on, as my colleague Mr Newland said, for quite some time, and we have quite a lot of frustration about the lack of progress that's been made when it comes to the modernisation programme. So do you have specific concerns about the deliverability?
It would be wrong for me to say, no, I don't have any concerns, because otherwise, if I didn't have any concerns, we'd go ahead and do it straight away. This is complex activity. We are still learning in some respects. There are difficult things which will need to be implemented. It will require work from the CAA, from across the sector, from government. There are a lot of component parts to this. But I wouldn't want to see it in just sort of, those sort of dark terms. It's we are making progress. It's not a big bang approach. Is suddenly one day we'll have modernised airspace. It's going to be an incremental process over a number of years, with the eventual goal being by 2040 we will have realised all the benefits that we have set out. So I don't think there'll be a moment where you'll wake up and go, right, I can see a real difference. It will happen in individual stages, and those stages will both be in the sort of things we're talking about in relation to integrating future flight, but they will also be in stages geographically within the UK. It is much easier to put some of these changes in place in areas where there's less traffic density, and so there's work being done in Scotland, for example, in the Glasgow-Edinburgh cluster, to take things forward more quickly, and I'm sure Mr. Newlands is familiar with them. I'm not saying that is easy to do, but it's far easier to do than down in the southeast of England. And that has the advantage of we can start to reap those incremental benefits, but we also learn. And we'll transfer that learning from elsewhere in the country.
Are you suggesting we could have a system in place in one part of the UK that's different to the other, and sort of twin?
No, it wouldn't be a different system. It would be a system which would realise the benefits that we're expecting out of airspace modernisation, better routing, greater environmental benefit, etc. We would be able to realise those benefits more quickly than in some parts of the country than we would be able to do across the whole country. So it wouldn't be a different system. You wouldn't be sort of flying between two entirely different things. It would just be a more efficient and effective in one part of the country as we gradually roll this out. That's just, that sort of activity happens all the time, those sort of incremental changes.
Thank you, Chair. Fabian.
Thank you, Chair. Can I move us on, Sir Stephen, to sustainable aviation fuel? I wondered what steps the CAA is taking to encourage sustainable aviation fuel uptake. For example, hydrogen fuel cell technology. Do you have the powers to do this? And are there any other levers that the CAA can use in this particular area? I don't know.
I'm going to ask Sophie.
Sure. Yeah. So we have quite a lot going on in this area. So we published our sustainability strategy very recently. But the part of that you're pointing to is how we enable some of these newer technologies in the sustainability area. So we have areas of the sector that are interested in looking at brand new technologies such as electric or hydrogen. They require different airframes, different regulation, because you effectively need quite a different aircraft. And then we've got the sustainable aviation fuel that you talk to, which can work with the same airframe, but you're fueling it in a different way. And actually right now you can use up to a 50% SAF blend. So what we're doing, if I turn to SAF first to encourage that, is we recently permitted the 100% SAF flight with Virgin that you may have seen. So we took that safety case through a series of technical gates to ensure that could be done safely, effectively to push the boundary, but to ensure that we had done that within the realms of a safety case. And we hope that encourages other operators to look at what they could do in terms of SAF going forward. In terms of hydrogen and electric, a lot of what I've talked to today is electric propulsion, RPAS, advanced air mobility, and then in terms of hydrogen, we have set up our Regulatory Pioneers funded Hydrogen Challenge, which has got 3 applicants in, where we are working with them on really the research and development of hydrogen, whether you have a hybrid engine, whether you have fully hydrogen propulsion type aircraft to understand what we need to learn and how we might regulate for that. So there's a number of things going on in that area. I should also mention we have also approved something called Project Acorn. That's the first ever hydrogen refuelling trial at an airport. So we're doing lots of communications on sustainability. It's all part of our sustainability strategy to also publish information on how the sector is becoming more sustainable, so that consumers can see that information. And then when it comes to new technologies, we've got various challenges and applicants that we are working closely with to encourage them.
Can I just question you a bit further on hydrogen? Sure. Because we all remember from the history books hydrogen being a very good fuel, but quite a dangerous one. Yep. I did a lot of work early in my career on hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, road vehicles. Okay. And one of the biggest problems was the storage, the safe storage on a road vehicle of hydrogen, because it's so combustible, and it's compression or it's freezing. How do you overcome that in terms of safety on an aircraft? Because however dangerous it might be on the road, it's a lot more dangerous in the air.
Yes, and I mean hydrogen is I would describe it as exciting but also challenging for exactly the reasons you've outlined. And storage, leakage, because you can't see it, these are all things that we need to work with industry on. And that's why we really must work in our demonstrate, scale, sustain mode of operation, because of the complexities and some of the risks that you outlined, so that we need demonstrations that happen within clear parameters, approved via a safety case, so that we can build our confidence. There is some way to go, and we are seeing the sector really lean into this as a challenge, and there's a lot of funding that we can see, but I don't have the answer at the moment as to how you could put it on an aircraft. I don't think anyone does.
I mean, there must be other fuels as well, or other forms of propulsion. Yep. I mean, obviously the obvious one is battery technology, but batteries are very heavy, bad enough again on the road. Goodness knows how you get them into the air. Are there any other? I mean, that poses a lot of challenges, I accept. But are there any other technologies that the aviation sector is working on at the moment that could overcome the carbon challenge and the weight and safety challenge?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question. That is one we are looking at internally all the time. So I think what I would say to start is, whatever the route is that aviation takes to meet the Jet Zero goals, part of the Net Zero plan, really it is our role to ensure that it's done safely. So as a regulator, we have to think very carefully about where we sit in terms of market development. We don't want to be too far out in front and essentially picking a winner and saying it will be hydrogen. Equally, we don't want to be too far behind. And that's why we have teams like our Horizon Scanning team that are looking at current developments at the moment. At the moment, we're primarily seeing SAF, and we're seeing electric, and we're seeing hydrogen. They are the main developments, but we will continue to monitor that. And then we need to work with industry to see how you might overcome some of these challenges. The heaviness of electric, as you've said, the combustibility of hydrogen. We need to keep working very closely with industry, sometimes do research ourselves. The downwash research that we've done in AAM is a good example of that, so that we can assure ourselves about mitigating those safety risks and work alongside the sector at the right tempo based on where it moves and essentially which way it may go to meet this challenge.
That sort of indirectly moves me on to my next question. Thank you for that, Sophie. I gather that you plan to publish an AI strategy this summer, and I wondered how you envisaged the greater use of AI and data more broadly, and how that would change the aviation sector or even fuel technology sector.
That's a very interesting question. I can talk a little bit to our strategy, and maybe ask.
So yes, I mean, every organisation is grappling with this, so we're not unique, and we are speaking to other organisations and other sectors to see what their experience is. I'm also slightly wary of AI strategies, because in an area like this, by the time you've written the strategy, it's probably a bit out of date. And so we need to make sure we don't fix ourselves into this is how the CAA is going to deal with the AI challenge. We need to be pretty agile in this area. I think there are two things which are, in my mind at this stage is, three things. I mean, firstly, there's enormous potential here. as there is in so many other sectors, but particularly technology-based ones. So this is not about how do we try and, resist or manage AI. It's about there's a great thing here that potentially. The challenge is going to be how do we protect safety, because that's our primary duty here. I see that working through in two areas. So at the moment, we rely on looking at platforms, seeing what they do, analysing data, and licensing and certifying on that basis. There's the possibility with AI, particularly in these new platforms, is that it will be able to generate itself to better capabilities and learn from all the platforms and absorb that. How are we going to know as a regulator why it's doing certain things if it's working on that sort of machine learning AI basis? Ultimately, safety decisions are vested in human beings. And how can we ensure that a human being has the ability to make those, still make those assessments against that sort of backdrop? But on a more positive side, and potentially easier, is we, the CAA, all regulators, in fact, the entire aerospace enterprise generates enormous quantities of data all the time. And at the moment, we rely too much on people analysing that data. What AI gives us the potential to do is analyse that data within certain algorithms to give us insights that we might otherwise miss. It's sadly very often the case when something goes wrong in aviation, in fact any enterprise, it's not the one that was on your risk register. It's something that comes up and people say, oh, where did that come from? And you subsequently, knowing that something has gone wrong, join bits of data together and say, well, actually we could have known about this if we were able to join that in a better way. AI gives us that potential to do that. But we need to make sure we get the data right, we need to understand where the sources of that data are, we need to understand the algorithms behind it, etc., etc. Say enormous potential, but like any organisation, we've got a lot of thinking to do to make sure that we can continue to operate in an AI environment whilst being able to guarantee to people who fly that we know what's going on, it's safe, human beings are ultimately making the decisions in relation to your safety.
I suppose like any software and any technology, the output, the outcome is only as good as what you put in terms of data and the human factor as well. Thank you very much indeed.
And we need to have that ability to, and we had a board discussion on this just a few weeks ago, is understand and be able to question the IT and not just sort of say, oh, okay, this is what it's telling us and accept it. How do we, how do we have the skills to ask the right questions and continue to assure technology?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Gavin, you did a quick supplementary on.
Yeah, SAF. Just very, very quickly, a supplementary on SAF. Mr. Sullivan, you mentioned the Virgin flight, which obviously required, given it was 100% SAF, required a permit to fly because it wasn't type certified, I presume, because of the fuel. Because of that, have you had access to data from that flight in terms of engine performance or condition or any residue or anything anything at all that's been fed back to you from Virgin or anybody else at all?
You've got something specific. As far as I'm aware, it was entirely unremarkable in that respect. And I suspect if there had been something remarkable, I would have heard about it. So I think it was, in a way, it's a proof of concept. Yep. It was building confidence in SAF. SAF is going to play a growing role, obviously, in terms of aviation's biggest challenge, which is the sustainability challenge. SAF is going to be a key factor for the foreseeable future as the other means of propulsion come along. But the importance of having SAF production capabilities worldwide is going to be absolutely vital. There's a lot is going to have to be done there.
I agree, and thanks for allowing me to ask that question, because it now allows me to take it back to a conspiracy theorist who felt it's suspicious that no data had come out of this flight, etc., etc. No matter what I said, I could not placate him. So I don't generally ask questions for conspiracy theorists to get in touch. It's not a common thing I do, but I had the opportunity. So thanks, Chair.
Thank you. We've covered a lot of ground today. I'd just like to conclude this session in some questions in one final area, and that's the thorny issue of Heathrow landing charges. The airlines routinely criticise the model for setting those charges. The airport will no doubt have a counter view. But could you say what work you are doing for the next series of the next part of the process in setting the landing charges in the future? Or what changes are coming?
So I can take that one. So in terms of the H7 price control process, there is currently that went through. We issued a final decision last year. Following that, it was appealed to the CMA by four organisations, 3 airlines and Heathrow. And broadly, the CMA agreed with the outputs of our final decision. There were a few areas that we had to take forward, and they are out for further consultation at the moment to arrive at a final price control. Alongside that piece of work, we're also undertaking an exercise to review the approach that we take to setting the price controls, and we're doing that for both NATS and Heathrow. And we undertook a consultation earlier this year. The results, the consultation has now closed. I think we had 15 responses to that consultation, and we're considering those responses. The consultation asked questions about what a review should look like, what things should be included in the scope of review, governance processes, and what sort of things we should consider in the price control building blocks. We plan to complete our review towards the end of the summer, and following that we will publish a policy note which will set out our lessons learned.
Thank you. Well, we'll be interested in hearing further detail on that once you've concluded the review of the responses.
We'll be happy to share.
Thank you very much indeed for your time this morning and for undertaking to write back to us on the various points we've discussed. But for now, thank you again. Order, order.
The proceeding has ended. 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 The proceeding has ended.